There's a pretty one, Ulysses. There it is.
Well, it's incredibly exciting to welcome the Irish writer Lynn to Bite Size Book Chats. This is Lynn's debut appearance on this series, but she and I had a long-form chat a couple of years ago, I think, about her most recent novel, What Willow Says, which was one of my favorite books that year. And also she is the author of the 2018 novella, The Groundsman. Welcome, Lynn.
Well, thanks, Sean. Thanks ever so much for having me back to talk about something that's really close to my heart as well.
Yes, we are here to talk about a debut novel called
The Nature
Book, a novel by Tom Comitta, who is an American writer.
Yeah, I think they're based in America. But yeah, I absolutely love this book, The Nature Book. Have you heard about it at all?
Just a little bit, but mostly from your Instagram posts, Lynn. So please enthuse away.
Well, I will enthuse. You'll have to forgive me, but if you love literary nature writing, then this will be right up your street, because as the title suggests, it's all about nature, but it's all fiction. And the most exciting thing about it is that Tom didn't write a single word of it himself. It's a complete collage of other writers, bits of writing stuck together, which are about nature. But that's not necessarily nature writers as you would expect him to collate like non-fiction or creative non-fiction writing. He's selected bits out of 300, in fact, different authors' books, 300 different pieces, and he's collaged them together. And some of the writers you wouldn't even think associate with nature writing, but we all pop it in a bit, don't we, a description of the landscape or something, and kind of swipe over a few pages when it gets a bit arduous. So the chunky book, it's not a novella. There's a whole book just about nature writing. You can kind of be off put at the very beginning, but it's not like that at all. I kid you not. I only skimmed 3 pages at the very most out of the entire book, because it's amazing how he has sewn all these pieces together. And at the end of the book, he lists all the sources. He lists the 300 writers or 300 books, because there are some writers who appear several times. And there's some big name ones, and there's the Moby Dick because of all the sea scenes and everything. And then there's a lot of the classics, Daphne du Maurier, who you'd recognize straight away. And that technique is called collage. And I've used that before in some of my short stories which have been published. And there are 3 types of collaging other writers work together. There's the seamless type, which is what Tom uses in their work, where you can't tell the difference between one writer and the next. And there's only twice it's kind of jarred and you go, oh, that didn't quite work. But they've done it brilliantly. They've sewn it all together, and it seamlessly flows from one writer to the next, because it's still talking about the same topic. And that's how they do it. Now, other writers, your viewers will be familiar with, I don't know, Lincoln in the Bardo by George Saunders. George Saunders would have used that collage technique of bringing in found written material and inserting it into their own writing. And it stands out in George Saunders' case. That's the author's point. He wants it to stand out. And that's what I've done sometimes as well. It's very obvious that there's polyphonic voices from the past, from other authors. And then sometimes, which is the third option, which is I make up found material, pretend that this is a newspaper report, or pretend this is another author speaking. And that avoids all the copyright problems. but Tom has used these 300 authors, some dead, some still alive, and sewn them all together seamlessly. And part of that problem, I'm thinking all the time, I really want to ask Tom Comitta this: how did your publishers basically get around the copyright problem? Because a lot of these authors are still alive. And, your copyright as an author stays with you for 70 years after your death. And there are 300 different sources in this book. So that's a huge amount of research that the editors had to do, saying, can we have the copyright for this? Can we have the copyright for this?
Yes.
So a lot of people have agreed to be in this book.
So I'd like to talk for a moment more about this seamlessness. When you're reading the book, is it obvious to you where one excerpt stops and another starts? Is there a font change or anything, or is it all just
There's no font change at all? No, and that's beautiful, the way that it just carries on. So the change could happen mid-sentence, and it does. And I can't tell unless I know the author really, really well. So if I can spot that's Barbara Kingsolver, or I can spot that's Daphne du Maurier, say, and then they're not always really obvious at all who the author is unless you know off by heart the writing. And there's no change in typeface at all. It just it's so seamless. It's beautiful the way that works. And you think, well, where's the author's voice? And the author's voice, Tom Comitta's voice, is really, really clear. And he didn't write a single word.
Can you say more about that? That's very intriguing.
Yeah, I think that comes from them choosing these particular pieces and writing a story. And they have written a story, and it flows amazingly. And they have composed a structure to a story. There is a flow to it. There's a pace to it. There's a rhythm to it. But none of the actual words are Tom's words. So you can imagine how much time that must have taken to need those words, and not being allowed to draw on the ones from your own brain. You're having to collect and collate the ones in front of you. And I've noticed Tom has been presenting passages from this novel in the past, going back about 8 years, I think. I think 8 years ago was the last time I spotted something that Tom was working on and publicly presented. And it's taken that long, I think, just like cinematic big films which Tom was influenced by. They take just as long too. I think it takes a lot longer when you're working with found pieces written by somebody else to try and get your own voice through somebody else's words. Now, other authors are kind of quite renowned for doing that currently. Everyone's reading and talking about Kathryn Scanlan at the moment, and Kick the Latch. That was using recorded words which they transcribed and put on the page, and their own voice is very, very clear in that. And Osebol, I don't know if you've read that, by Marit to Kapla.
No, but I know a little bit about it.
So they're the same, that's using found words from somebody else and putting them together in such a way that is very emotional and very charismatic and has a personality all of its own. But it's how the author has edited those words without adding any of their own that makes it really special and makes it have their own voice. And it's how they compose and put it together. And, they've controlled the recipe, basically. They've got all these ingredients together, and with their recipe, they've come up with something brilliant and new. From a nature writing point of view, I think, it's quite an incredible achievement. And not only that, but to make an exciting read as well, to make it a page turner.
If this question is too glib, I will delete it. But what did you get out of it? Was there a message? What was the point of doing this? What did you take away from it, Lynn?
My takeaway was first of all, the technical skill involved. Anyway, the technical skill and the ability to maintain readers' interest without any human beings in it, without any human emotional story, to contain emotion without the human connection. Now, there is that lack as well, but you don't experience a lack at all. So I think that was the major achievement, and the fact that it's such a page turner without any humans, and there is a plot, but you have to be reading it to realise where the plot is.
And can I ask you, what are you working on now? When can we expect another book with your name on it?
Well, the books I'm reading at the moment are very factual at the moment. I'm going through all my nature books, as in non-fiction nature books, and birds in flight. And if anybody can help me out here and recommend poetry of birds in flight, I'd really appreciate it, because that's something that's involved in the book I'm writing at the moment, and it concentrates on birds in flight, not just birds singing, because that's not relevant to me because I don't hear them singing, but their actual flight patterns, because that's an art project that I've done in the past, and I'm writing about that anyway at the moment. So any poetry that anybody could recommend would be much appreciated, of birds in flight, on the wing.
How fabulous. I hope that you get lots of suggestions in the comment section.
I hope so.
Lynn, thank you so much.
Thank you.
It's always a special treat to welcome a brand new guest to Bite Size Book Chats, and especially one from my, I feel like it's my alumni, my former obsessive place of bookish social media, Litsy. This is Chelsea from Ohio. Welcome, Chelsea.
Hello.
Nice to meet you. Do you remember how long we've been following each other? I think you said you've been on Litsy 6 years, and I think I've been about 6 or 7.
Mm-hmm.
I think we've been following each other all that time.
Probably. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, nice to finally put a face to the name.
Yes.
Chelsea's here to talk about a 2023 new release, a novel called Hello Beautiful by Anne Napolitano, which has a gorgeous cover. And I'm curious about it. It's an Oprah pick. Tell us about the opening premise.
Yeah, and I think it's her 100th pick, which is pretty substantial itself. But I am into the family sagas, character-driven novels, and this definitely fits right in my wheelhouse of character-based, but also the characters felt real to me in this. And it's getting a lot of attention because it's based loosely, I would say, off Little Women. And there are 4 sisters in the novel. So a big family. And then, we're starting young with them. And then we follow them throughout their lifetime. The novel focuses mostly on the 2 oldest sisters. And the author even playfully, I would say, makes references to Little Women through the characters, through the sisters. They argue over who is, who's the Jo, who's the Meg. 2 of the sisters want to be Jo. And I would say each of them have pieces of Jo. And then there's the younger 2 sisters, which we don't see as much in the novel. So then William may be considered our main character. Actually, the novel starts with his story, and I guess each reader would take something different from the book, but to me, it's mainly about the sisterhood, these relationships, and William meets the oldest sister in college, and I don't want to say too much about what happens there, but he becomes involved in the entire novel through the end, but he might be considered the main character to some readers, which his story is certainly entertaining, and he felt authentic to me as well as a reader. But I read it for the sisterly bond aspect and what happens with them.
And it's the sign of a layered, full-bodied novel where you get to choose who you think the main character is. How fabulous. You obviously had read Little Women before you read this novel. Mm-hmm. Do you think that one should read Little Women before they read this novel, or will it stand alone on its own merits?
There are some diehard Little Women fans out there. And the movie, I think, the recent movie, I don't know what year that came out, but with Timothée Chalamet, which,
I haven't seen the movie, and I only know this much about Timothée Chalamet, but I'm going to Google him as soon as we get off here.
Yes, he's worth it. So I think there's a new generation of Little Women readers out there, and I think it certainly would enhance the reading experience. I read Little Women in adulthood. I wasn't a girl when I read it, so I was already a mother by the time I read Little Women. So I had a different perspective on the novel.
What can you tell us about the author? Is this a debut?
So I believe this is her 4th novel.
Yeah, she's had quite a few, I see now, yeah.
And the one prior to this I have read, which is titled Dear Edward, also very character-driven, and it is I believe they've done an adaptation for Apple TV with a series. And my mind is telling me Jennifer Garner is the mother in that. We probably need to fact check that. But anyway, yeah, I did read Dear Edward several years ago. It was a bestseller at the time, and it's about the lone survivor of a plane crash. Very sentimental, very heartbreaking, grief. Some of those themes are in this as well. Hello, Beautiful.
Okay, that's a good segue to my next question, which is, what is the tone of this novel?
Yeah, so I like novels that are maybe not one tone, it kind of feels like real life where some parts are happy and exciting and, playful. And then even in the beginning of this novel, Hello, Beautiful, there's some hints that something darker may be coming. So the sisters, they fight over who gets to be Joe. And then anytime one of them is sick, they're immediately Beth. So that conversation happens early in the novel. And then so, of course, readers have that in their minds. And I, at least, was like, what does this mean for us later in the novel? So, yeah, there are some hard parts as well. I had tears in my eyes. I listened to the audiobook. It's expertly narrated by Maura Tierney.
Well, this might be one that I'll try on audio. Was there anything that you didn't like about this book?
Yeah, I can't think of anything I didn't like.
Okay.
I will say, as a reader, I don't like to feel like I'm supposed to feel a certain way about a character. And William is written very sympathetic. I felt that readers are supposed to not take his side, but understand some of his actions, that had they happened in my life, or, if William were a person that I know in my life, I would have a hard time agreeing with some of the choices that he made. Not that I didn't like that, because I feel this way. I feel so strongly. I feel like these are real characters. The author did a fantastic job of bringing them to life. But I do feel that we're supposed to, as the readers, are supposed to feel sympathetic towards William. And I do, to an extent. And I'll just say that I don't want to get into any spoilers.
Right. Well, that's tantalizing. I'm looking forward to trying it. I think I probably will do it as either an audio or as an audio text combo, where I have the book open and the book and the audiobook in my ears. Chelsea, thanks for telling us about this book, and I hope you'll come back someday.
Yeah, it was fun.
Mikiko is joining us from Ireland again today. Hello, Mikiko.
Hi, Sean.
I think this is the only time since I've known you where I've talked to you twice in succession and you were in the same country.
I know. It's really bad.
We're here to talk about a novel that by a novelist, a British novelist, that I thought I was the only person alive that had even heard of her. So this is going to be fun. It is The Snowball. Good time to talk about it in late December. Yes. The Snowball by Brigid Brophy. Yes. I'll tell my little story about Brigid Brophy later, but this novel, published in 1964, I will just say one more thing before I turn it over to you, which is the Goodreads description says it melds her avid interests in opera, sexuality, and psychology. How's that for a tease?
I think it's an apt description.
Apt description. So my thing on opera is I love opera except for one thing, the singing.
For shame, for shame.
With that out of the way, please tell us about this book.
Thank you. Well, it is a snowball, but it's taking place on New Year's Eve, and it's a costume ball. So you have a whole bunch of people coming dressed up and masked, and actually there's no theme, but it is kind of this 18th century Rococo styled ball. So it's opulence, it's extravagance, it's lots of whites, pastels, frivolity. You get a lot of that throughout the story. a lot of pointing and illusion. So actually, if you're not interested in doing a bit of work before you come to your books or while you're reading your books, this may not be the book for you. There is allusion to opera. Sorry, Sean. It's Mozart's Don Giovanni. So if you don't know about it, which I didn't know really anything about, so I had to go and do the research. Then you may get a little lost, but I don't think the story gets lost if you don't have that background, but it does clarify maybe behavior or behaviors, because it's more than one character, and definitely sets the scene a little bit better. But you don't need it by any means. But this is definitely a book that it does make you think.
How on earth did you come to this book?
I was in Belfast. I was just randomly walking around in the rain and found a Waterstones, and I walked in, and I think it was this year or last year, Faber republished it. Actually, I should have written that down. I think it was
2020, maybe 2020.
Yeah, 2020. And so it was on a feature wall. And to be honest, the cover is stunning, and that's why I picked it up. It's just beautiful. And I looked at the back and I thought, oh, this sounds interesting. The premise is a woman who goes to this Snowball masked as Donna Anna, the main character in Don Giovanni, the opera by Mozart. And then there's a gentleman there who is masked as Don Giovanni. And, as they ring in the new year and they're singing Auld Lang Syne and everyone's kissing, it ends up being a bit more than just, a Happy New Year's peck. And it becomes a bit more
involved.
And
more involved.
That's it. And then the gentleman who is masked as Don Giovanni, grabs this Donna Anna and just really gets in there, and it's described as a passionate.
Oh my God! I never thought I'd hear Mikiko say that.
So it's quite it is quite scandalous, and if you're thinking about the time period and what's happening, and they're strangers, they don't know each other. They just happen to show up at this ball dressed as these two characters. The antics ensue from there.
And plot ensues. Why did you like it? Because it's got a pretty low rating, 3.64 on Goodreads.
Yeah,
but you liked it more than that.
I do, and I've actually listened to it 3 times because I listened to it on audiobook. Okay. The first time I listened to it, I knew I was missing something, so I listened to it again, and then I was like, I think I need to do a bit more research. So I learned about the opera, and I just started picking out different kinds of references that Brophy includes. And it felt like a much more cohesive story after that. Then as I thought about how she had used, allegory, illusion, all of these different kinds of references, everything really seemed to come together a lot better. And I found that I just couldn't stop thinking about it. And I always thought, well, that's a good sign that's a good sign for readers if you can't stop thinking about a book. And then I read it again in preparation for our chat today. So, and it was even better this time, to be honest.
That's great. So let's talk again in a week and see how you feel about it.
There you go.
What can you tell us about the author?
So she is somebody who was quite involved with women's rights. She was a feminist, but she was also a pacifist. And I believe that she did end up marrying somebody, but she had quite strong opinions about marriage, about the Vietnam War, about vegetarian and veganism, and religion's role in education. So she was this is the 60s. It's not really that uncommon to hear of a woman having these kinds of, strong opinions about these things. But I think she was quite vocal about it.
Yeah. And her dates, just to get her dates out there, born 1929, died 1995. Never heard her discussed on BookTube or anything. So I have 2 of her books. She came onto my radar because she has written, and you might be interested in this.
I probably will be.
She has written a biography of the early 20th century gay novelist, Ronald Firbank. And there he is on the cover.
Oh, I see. Okay.
And there's the title, Prancing Novelist, which is the best title for a biography of a gay novelist I've ever heard of. In praise of Ronald Firbank. And look at that. It's about
that's chunky.
It's about 600 pages. And Apparently, it's also a defense of fiction, of literary fiction.
Oh,
So it's
interesting.
both in one. So that's what put
Nice.
her on my radar.
Well, she is a
And
biographer. Like she's an
yeah,
essayist, a dramatist, a
that's right.
novelist. Like she's, yeah.
So this is one of her biographies. And then I have this novel, The King of a Rainy Country, which I haven't read.
I like the cover.
There you go. King of a Rainy Country. And this is 1956, so a decade earlier. Very short novella, we should say. It's about 160
Yes.
pages. Yeah.
Yep. Yep.
It's on audio. Thanks for telling us about it.
Thank you for having me.
Well, I'm Sean the Book Maniac, and I'm a bit starstruck to welcome this next guest onto my channel. This is Kit the Reader from Worcestershire in the UK, and the creator behind Kit the Reader BookTube channel, which is fast becoming one of my must-watch channels. Welcome, Kit.
Hi, nice to see you.
Was that a little bit of an overpowering introduction?
I'm a bit starstruck to see you, actually. I'm enjoying watching your videos.
We're a couple star-crossed book lovers. I have only recently, like 2 weeks ago, I think, discovered Kit's channel, and I've watched every video they've put out. Thanks. So, Kit, please tell us about your channel.
It is where I just like to talk about books. I've carved out a little space for myself on the internet, away from my life of parenting all the time, where I just get to talk about books with people who like books. And yeah, I'm enjoying it so far. I'm fairly new, but I'm loving it so far. Everybody talking about books with me makes me happy.
And our reading tastes are very similar.
Yeah, I think they are quite similar. Yeah, quite literary fiction, books by women.
Literary fiction by women. Yep. Is there anything else that you read that I don't know about yet?
No, I don't know. I feel like my tastes are a lot of nonfiction. I don't know if I've talked about nonfiction all that much on my channel, I suppose. I like a lot of memoirs. I'm trying to read more books that teach me something. Yeah.
Your most recent video was a 40-minute diatribe or review of the women's long list. It was fabulous, so people should check that out. Do you read other prize lists as well?
I haven't. I got asked that earlier as well, about if I was going to read the Booker this year, and I've always avoided the Booker. It feels too pretentious for me at the moment. Maybe I should dip my toes in, but I quite like that the Women's Prize was created as an answer to the Booker Prize having no female authors on their list in the early 90s, and so I'm always kind of a bit about it, and so the Women's Prize is the one I've followed for a good few years now.
Speaking of nonfiction, we're here to talk about a memoir that Kit has recently read, The Troubles with Us, One Belfast Girl on Boys, Bombs, and Finding Her Way by Alix O'Neill. Came out in 2021. Tell us about this book, Kit.
Yeah, it's Alix O'Neill's memoir, her growing up as in the 90s in Belfast during the Troubles. And she lived in quite a notorious area of West Belfast on the Falls Road. So she was right in the middle of it. And I think this could have easily been a story of doom and gloom, as a lot of books about the Troubles can be. What I really liked about this book was how it just showed how everybody just lived their life amongst the Troubles going on. And it showed what real life was like for people in that time. But it didn't show it as sadness. It showed it with a lot of humour, and that everybody just got on with life. It talked about her family, particularly her mom and her crazy family history, that I think if it wasn't in a non-fiction book, if it was in a fiction book, you wouldn't believe it. And I think that was a really interesting part of it. And then it follows Alix as she grows up, goes to university and leaves Northern Ireland, and kind of looks back on her childhood and says, actually, that wasn't that normal, and kind of realizes that her upbringing wasn't normal and it was different. And you shouldn't have to have a handmade bomb in your garden and just think that was okay. That's just what her life was like. So I thought it was really original memoir, and it was really good, and it was really funny.
How old was she when the story starts, basically?
It touches briefly on her childhood, but the main focus is her teenage years. She's a teenager growing up during the 90s. Yeah. She's
from a Catholic family. Is there stuff about relating to Protestants or socially at school or whatever? I'm assuming that's a big part of the story.
Yeah, for sure. It was really interesting. It really gave us a great social and political history about why these things happened as well, because I feel like you know about the Troubles in that the Catholics and the Protestants are against each other, but it teaches us why, and then it shows us how that kind of bleeds into daily life, in that they go to a Catholic school, but they won't ever outright ask anybody else in the street. If you met like a boy at a party, you'd never say, are you a Catholic? You always ask like their surname or where they go to school or anything like that, and you can pick up things. And I thought that was really interesting. And that actually is a moment in Louise Kennedy's Trespasses where they ask somebody's surname, and it's not actually explained in that book, but I understood it because I'd previously read the memoir, like what was going on there, and that subtlety that isn't spoken about, but everybody understands in Northern Ireland.
Yes, and you and I both have recently read Louise Kennedy's Trespasses and both loved it.
I read the memoir, and then a couple of weeks later I read Trespasses, and it was actually a really nice pairing.
Perfect timing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Trespasses is set at the start of the Troubles, and the memoir is set at the end. So it was interesting to see what was similar and what was different. And really, it was really quite similar. It was just people getting on with it, and children and young people being affected, but also just getting on with their life and just thinking this was normal.
Approximately how old was she when she left Ireland, Northern Ireland?
She left Northern Ireland when she was 18. She went down to Dublin to go to university, and then after university she went and worked in London for quite a while, and now she lives in France with her husband and 2 children. I read earlier that she said she wouldn't want to go back and live in Northern Ireland again. France is a better place to bring up her children. She wouldn't want her children raised in Northern Ireland like she was.
Was there anything that you didn't like about this book?
I can't really pick a fault, if I'm honest. And you know me, you know I can pick faults in books.
Yes. So that's a strong recommend from Kit. If they
Honestly,
don't have anything bad to say, because they would not hold back if they did.
Honestly, and the audiobook is brilliant. She reads it herself, and it really helps hearing her accent, the way she reads people's voices, and like the humor really comes across because she reads, you know, everything that people say, and there's a lot of Northern Irish slang and everything, and so hearing all of that, it all really comes together in a really great memoir.
Kit, thanks so much for telling us about this book. I hope you'll come back.
Oh, I will. Thank you so much for having me.